They don't have to live with anxiety. They don't have to live with depression. There are ways to neutralize the root cause of these things, not just manage it. Managing it is putting a Band-Aid on, but you can actually eliminate anxiety for yourself with this tool by going after the fears that create it.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Nourished Inside Out. Today I'm here with Amy Vincze. She has been a dedicated professional in the health and wellness industry for over 20 years as a certified massage therapist, nutritional therapist, colon hydrotherapist, Reiki Master, and tapping coach. She brings a wealth of expertise to her work. Since earning her certification as a tapping coach 16 years ago, Amy has witnessed profound transformations, both in her own life and in the lives of her clients. She's even used tapping to heal herself from painful chronic medical conditions, and she is the founder of Soar with the Soar with Tapping app. Amy is on a mission to make the life-changing benefits of tapping accessible to people everywhere. She firmly believes that tapping is one of the most powerful and transformational healing tools available today. Thank you for joining us today, Amy.
Well, thank you for having me, Anita. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Can you give us a little bit background story on how you got started as a tapping coach and what led you to this?
Yeah, I can say that I've always kind of been a seeker. I mean, you can tell a little bit from my bio that I've tried a lot of different things and have interest in a lot of different things, but it was all kind of in the mindset of, figuring out a way to be better or to be happier, that sort of thing. But my life took a turn in my early 30s when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Nobody in my family had a history of that. And so it really came out of the blue. Um, and I was really curious about why me. And I don't mean that in a shake your fist at God kind of way, like, why me? But I was like, no, really, why me? What makes my thought process or my body or anything more vulnerable to something like breast cancer as opposed to somebody else? And so I really wanted to find out those answers. And it led me down a path that eventually led to tapping. One of the first things I did was I went to Tony Robbins events, and I absolutely love Tony. He's filled with so much heart and wanting to help people change for the better. But there was something missing in it for me, because I would come home from the event all fired up, but the effects wouldn't last.
Hmm.
And then I was introduced to tapping, and I suddenly understood that it was because I still had all of these emotional blocks in my body and in my subconscious, so that it was trying to protect me so fiercely that it would prevent me from moving forward. And I can
Hmm.
explain a little bit more about that as we go along, but really that was the thing. It was breast cancer that led me to tapping and finding those answers that I was seeking out all those years, and come to find out it was from childhood trauma that we still hold in our bodies, and without processing it, they continue to kind of wreak havoc in the way that we live our lives.
That's a really interesting point that you brought up on how childhood trauma, something that s- things that you've experienced as a child had later on resulted in breast cancer or chronic pain and things like that. How does unresolved trauma manifest in our lives? Because a lot of times when we go to seminars like Tony Robbins and we are so fired up after those kinds of weekends, but then exactly like you said, the effects don't last that long because there's still those blockages. How can childhood trauma block us from becoming our best self?
Well, I do want to explain that there are a couple of different types of traumas. There's
Mhm.
what we like to call big T trauma, which would be
Mhm.
really big events like a big car accident or like losing a parent when you're a young child is a really big T trauma, or any kind of abuse or assault. If it's something that happens habitually, though, then it becomes more complex. But if it's a big T trauma, just a one off event, that's that type of trauma. Little T traumas are things that you might not normally recognize as trauma. It could be as simple as being ignored by a parent
Mm.
because maybe they have to work two jobs in order to support the family. So there's just what could be considered as neglect or being ignored. It could be that there is an angry parent or sibling in the household, and you have to walk on eggshells to make sure that there isn't an angry outburst that happens. It could be that there's an overcritical parent, and so you do everything you possibly can in order to not get that lecture or criticism about what you're doing wrong. So those types of things are little T traumas. Those happen typically a lot over a period of years, and those can be a little bit more difficult to dislodge. But what happens is that they create all types of trauma, create fears in us. So if you have that angry parent, the fear is about triggering an angry event.
Yeah.
So then you develop a belief that you have to make everything in the household perfect in order to avoid something dangerous happening, like an angry parent becoming enraged. And when you have those fears and then they develop into limiting beliefs, and over decades and decades, then it becomes your way of looking through the world, the lens that you look through the world at. Then you become like a people pleaser, and you don't really have a sense of what you want. You're always concerned about making sure that other people are happy. But underneath all of that is the fear
Mm.
that was created by the trauma. And when that fear gets triggered over and over and over again, the amygdala in our brain, the stress center in our brain, goes into fight or flight mode and releases cortisol into our bodies in order to help us out of what it thinks is a dangerous situation. Now, when you have those hormones released in your body over and over and over again, and a lot of times it'll happen 20 times a day because we're triggered consistently, um, then those hormones build up in our system. They build up in our system just like if you were consistently experiencing massive amounts of joy, then those hormones would be released in our bodies and we would feel great. We would feel energized and happy. But when they are not, so cortisol gets released in our body, or happy hormones, and they can build up in our system. And when we don't have the opportunity to release the fears and release the limiting beliefs that are associated with the trauma, then they can cause problems over time. Doctors will agree that like 95% of illnesses are created by stress. And when you look at it, stress, it really is just those fears that are triggering that fight or flight mode in our system. So it's just a buildup over time. But when you
Mm-hmm.
can release them from your body and neutralize the effects those fears have had over the years, then it like clears the way for our body to heal itself.
Yeah, that's true. For some people, I've heard this a couple of times of people say, I don't have childhood trauma. And I think that we've all felt like that at some point, like, oh, I
Yeah.
don't have any childhood trauma. I don't need to heal any of that. But the reality is we all have healing to do and we all have trauma to some certain extent. What are the first steps that you recommend to somebody when you're working with them on how to start feeling their emotions again? Because for somebody who says they don't have childhood trauma, that sounds like a person who has been constantly numbing their emotions and just running away from the pain. So, what are some first steps to start opening that up?
Well, I just want to just acknowledge that I feel like I totally agree that I think it's one of the biggest misconceptions that people
Hmm.
have. Um, and I even thought that way because I was looking at trauma only as big T trauma. I was thinking,
Yeah.
well, I wasn't abused. I wasn't smacked around as a kid. I didn't have a lot of verbal abuse or anything along those lines. So I thought that I just had all of these limiting beliefs and fears as like a character defect.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until I really understood um, what type of trauma I had that I made that connection and was able to go, oh my God, okay, so maybe it wasn't my fault. Maybe it wasn't my fault. Now it's my burden to deal with. Um, because I can't go back and like heap it back on my parents or whoever committed the trauma. I still have to deal with it myself. And one of the best ways to start just, it's just acknowledging that trauma sometimes hides in plain sight. And it is the it's the result of being parented or being in an environment where there's other people who had their own traumas. It's not necessarily anybody's fault, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there is blame to place on anybody. It just means that this is the hand that we were dealt in life, and it's our work to figure out a way out of it if that's what we want to choose to do. So the things that hide in plain sight as trauma are things like an irrational reaction to maybe some criticism, or maybe it's an inability to get angry because, or like, a mom that will be able to get so angry on behalf of their kids or so angry on behalf of a really worthy cause. But when it comes to getting angry on their own behalf, they'll say, "Oh, I don't really get angry. I'm so adaptable. I'm so easygoing," and talking about it like it's a virtue. But that is a result of trauma because everybody should be able to get angry on their own behalf. It's a really important emotion. So things like that, because if you can't get angry on your own behalf, then you don't have boundaries and people will walk all over you. So it's those types of things, those types of traits or behaviors that are really triggered by childhood trauma. So recognizing that there is some type of behavior that might not necessarily be benefiting you, and then start looking at that and seeing, okay, what is underneath this behavior? So if that's an irrational reaction to criticism, what's underneath that behavior? Is it the fear that you might be failing? Is it the fear of getting judged or criticized by other people? And and then what if that is true, then what's underneath that? Like how do you what is it about being judged and criticized by somebody else that feels so scary? Would that mean the worst fears about yourself are being confirmed by somebody outside of you, like that you're not worthy or deserving of love? And then where did you learn that? You know what I mean? So you have to kind of back out of each situation where there's behavior that you didn't like about yourself, and then kind of back out of it and see, okay, what's underneath that? What if I am a failure? What actually does that mean? Does that mean that nobody's going to love me? Does that mean, and then how did I learn that? And it will usually lead you back to some type of behavior from parents or the people around you when you were growing up that sent you a certain message that made you think a certain way about yourself.
That's so interesting on what you just said about If somebody doesn't get angry or they're completely chill about almost everything, they lack boundaries. And I can actually really relate with that because there was a time in my life where like in my last relationship, I wanted to have control just as much as my partner wanted control. But I was constantly getting angry because I wasn't getting my way and he just constantly was pushing for his way. So then I've learned to just chill out and to just not care. And when I did that, it really did lack boundaries. And I think a lot of times, exactly like you said, it's valid to feel angry. It's valid to feel upset. It's valid. It's not okay to stay there and to stay in those pity emotions, but it's okay to feel them. Because if you don't feel them, then you don't have boundaries. And then that also lacks self respect for yourself. So I love how you said that and put it together.
Yeah, when you don't allow, for example, the emotion of anger, then you cut off your ability to figure out what's fair and not fair for yourself. Getting angry on your own behalf is the biggest clue that something feels unfair.
Yeah.
And that's important to pay attention to, right? Like you said, we don't want to live in anger. We don't want to be a rageaholic, but
Yeah.
we want to allow a natural emotion that is a clue for us that something isn't resonating with who we are.
Yeah, that's so incredible. I'm so glad you said that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, when you were starting your EFT tapping journey, how did you get into it? Did you find a mentor? Did you find like it online? Did you go to coaching? How did you get involved in it?
I was introduced to tapping by a friend who had found it and just thought it was wonderful. He said, I want to do a practice session with you. And so we did that, and I was immediately drawn to it. I sought out my own tapping coach after that and was certified as a coach shortly thereafter. I just found it so powerful. I have to admit that I had kind of limited success with it at first because I
Mm,
was always applying tapping to the symptoms that I was experiencing, which is important to do because sometimes in a moment you just need a band-aid over
mhm.
the moment to get through your day, and that's really important. Sometimes it's not always easy to go backwards and find the root cause of something and then do the tapping to neutralize those things. um, but I was having limited success, like I said, because I was procrastinating a lot, and I would focus my
Mhm.
tapping on procrastination, which would
Mm.
help me in a moment, but it kept coming up, as an issue. It kept being something that felt like a huge block in my life. And there was a moment, like 6 years ago, when I reached kind of a crisis point in my life where a lot of things were kind of crumbling around me. And I started using tapping on the root causes. I just kind of did it by instinct. I was tapping for like 30 minutes a day on my treadmill while I was doing some walking. And I just started going underneath and focusing on the fears that were underneath all of these things. And that's when I realized the true potential of this tool to really eliminate massive, massive fears in my life. All of a sudden, my life opened up in ways I couldn't have even imagined because I was letting go of these big underlying fears based on the trauma. Um, yeah, so then that was the point where I was like, "Oh my God, I have to make this available to people. They have to understand and know that they don't have to continue to live in a disempowered way of thinking or in a fearful way of thinking. They don't have to live with anxiety. They don't have to live with depression. There are ways to neutralize the root cause of these things, not just manage it. Managing it is putting a band aid on, but you can actually eliminate anxiety for yourself with this tool by going after the fears that create it.
That's incredible. How does tapping address the root cause to break free from those blockages? And does it work for emotional, physical, or spiritual trauma, or all of it?
I would say all of the above.
Mm-hmm.
All of the above. Okay, so how does it address the root cause? So if we look at trauma, for example, trauma, all kids are like naturally narcissistic, right? They assume that everything in their environments happens because of them. So I'll use myself as an example. And my dad was an alcoholic, and he left us when I think I was like 4 years old. So I made the assumption that it was because of me, that
Mm,
there was something wrong with me. And that was the question that I asked myself moving forward after anything happened that wasn't ideal or wonderful in some way, shape, or form. I assumed that it was my fault. It was a way of trying to adapt and fix the situation that I never kind of transitioned out of because of that trauma. So when I was using tapping, I was talking about how, of course, I created that belief that there was something wrong with me because I was a child
mm-hmm,
that didn't have all the information, was unable to look at it from a comprehensive perspective. So I didn't have all the information. I was looking at it from my child brain. And of course, I made that assumption that something was wrong with me. That's not actually true. And I'm tapping all the while I'm saying these things. Of course, it wasn't true. It was really just about the fact that my dad was an alcoholic and he had his own trauma that he left, and he needed to do that in order to heal himself. It didn't have anything to do with me. And so taking that off the slate as something that was my fault was the thing that kind of allowed me to blossom and realize there's really nothing wrong with me. So, but if I was to work on in a moment, for example, like focusing on procrastination and focusing on feeling like I'm lazy, because that was something that I found that was wrong with me, right? So if I was just tapping on feeling lazy, but not understanding that there really wasn't something wrong with me, then would continue to like try to find a reason for why I was procrastinating instead of going to the root cause of there's something wrong with me.
mm-hmm,
So when I neutralize that, then all of these other things kind of filter away. I
mm-hmm.
didn't think that there was anything wrong with me after that. I just felt like there was situations that were harder than others. You know what I mean? Like it changed the lens that I looked through my entire life at. If somebody really hurts you when you're a kid, you have to focus on that hurt. You have to focus on the feelings of betrayal and the feelings of how it's unsafe to make yourself vulnerable with anybody else moving forward because they could hurt you. You have to focus on those things with the tapping. And then, like, the idea that somebody could hurt you moving forward tends to go away, or it feels less threatening to open your heart up again. Like you're talking
Yeah.
about your relationship,
Mm-hmm,
the one that was abusive.
mm-hmm.
And if you focused tapping on all of the feelings and the ways that it felt abusive, and how you might be guarding your heart a little more carefully moving forward, you would have a lot more healing than if you focused on, why can't I open my heart to this person in my life, who seems like on paper to be like a really great person, but I can't find the connection with him because my heart is so closed off. So you have to focus on the root cause. The cause is the last relationship.
Hmm.
So does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I want to go back to what you were saying about when you were younger. When you were younger, you mentioned that you thought you were the problem for the reason why your dad left. And when we grow up, because that's all we know is all we know when we're kids. If nobody's explaining these things to us, then we don't know. But when we're younger, if a situation like that happens, or in my case, my parents were not very communicative with me. So, for example, I was constantly people pleasing, and I always felt like I was the problem because my parents would never say, I'm proud of you. They wouldn't say good job. They wouldn't try to like encourage me in those types of ways. So I grew up as a people pleaser by seeking attention because I thought I was the problem. I thought I wasn't doing enough. And as we get older, we need to realize that we're not broken. We're
Right.
not the problem.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with us. We're human beings. Like, nobody gave us a blueprint on how to be an adult. Nobody gave us a blueprint. And it's okay to feel emotions. So many times we get told, stuff your feelings under the rugs, just stuff them
Yeah.
under the bed.
Yeah.
But that's not valid advice. It's valid to feel them. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because if there's anything I want people to know is that they're not the problem and they're not broken. They're just figuring out life one day at a time. That's all.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that in our culture and in our history, we've often made emotions wrong.
Hmm.
And the truth is, we are emotional beings
Yeah.
and we have these inherent needs for attention, for love and affection, for belonging. And when we don't get those things, there are a lot of challenging emotions that come up. Again, they are clues to something that's out of balance and causing, disruptions in our life. And they serve a really great purpose. And it's when we lean into the emotions and lean into the feelings around all of these things that we are able to let it go. Really, the emotions just want their day in court. They want to be acknowledged and they want to be honored. And when we can do that, when we can really gain that emotional intelligence, and what I mean by emotional intelligence, I mean the ability to um, identify and name the emotion that we're feeling, as well as being able to really allow ourselves to feel it and sit with that for a moment.
Hmm.
I think that is probably the biggest revelation that any of us can have in our lives, that there's nothing to fear when it comes to emotions. It really is just a process that we are meant to go through in order to release them from our bodies.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
completely agree with you. In your experience working with people and introducing EFT tapping to people, what are some of the most profound transformations that you've witnessed in your clients using these methods?
Um, I'll tell you a couple of different examples because there
Yeah,
are a tapping works differently with different types of issues.
sure.
So, for example, I had a woman come to me who had a real extreme phobia of flying.
Okay.
And there was no event. She just had this phobia. And it was showing up and preventing her from going on family vacations and was really limiting her lifestyle because she wasn't able to travel the way that she would want to. Um, and we did one 90-minute session focusing on all her fears about the flight. And everything surrounding it, including, being enclosed in a small space, including having zero control over how the plane gets flown,
Mhm.
and being in close vicinity with people. There's all kinds of things. But within 90 minutes, she was totally phobia free. And I even talked with her after she went on a couple of flights, and she's like, yeah, I have zero problems moving forward. So if there's no like traumatic event that is associated with something like that, it's really easy to neutralize using tapping.
Wow.
There are more complex traumas, like the small T traumas, or even big T traumas that happen over a period of time, whether it's years or decades. And a lot of limiting beliefs are developed as a result. So I'll tell you about one client who, her mother was murdered at a very young age, and her dad was an alcoholic. She had a mother in law that was really controlling,
Mm.
and she learned over time that she was a problem, basically, that she was a problem for everybody, and that people were abandoning her and leaving her because there was something wrong with her. But I worked with her, and she had a psychotic break at one point in her life. And I worked with her weekly for about a year, between a year and 18 months, I believe. And in that short period of time, even with all of that, it didn't take 10 years of, intense therapy. It took a year to 18 months of weekly 90-minute sessions. And she was thriving in her career. And she ended up in a really loving relationship, and she was pregnant. And, all of these things were really happening for her that she wanted in her life. And it just, it's so powerful that it could neutralize things enough. Now, granted, I will tell you, she's going to have to continue to keep doing work as her life expands, because we heal in layers. So
Yes.
she was able to transcend that part of herself that was in the psychotic break and feeling really scared about life in general, and then open it up into this new environment. But because she expanded, there will be a point where she's going to come up against those same fears again. When she wants to expand even more, she's going to need to go through another layer of healing. Those limiting beliefs that developed are probably going to be with her forever, but they will get smaller and smaller as she expands and gets bigger and bigger and allows herself to be more of who she really is. She'll be able to get rid of those things in layers. But I mean, those are just two stories. I've got many, and including my own healing from a lot of physical ailments. I had UTIs pretty much on a regular basis. I've had thousands of them in my life from the time I was
Oh,
2 years old up until 6 or 7 years ago, when I had that crisis I was
wow.
telling you about.
Yeah.
And I discovered what the root cause of the problem was for me. And I have not had to take medication since then, when I was on medication almost every day for that period of my life. I also had really severe lower back pain, to the point where I would have to crawl on my knees in order to go to the bathroom. It was so painful. And I discovered the root cause of that. And they are emotional issues. I tapped through the emotional issue for my lower back for probably a total of about 2 hours. And it's been 6 years, and I haven't had any problems. And it was 30 years of back pain before that, really intensely. So these emotional issues really build up in our bodies. And once they are acknowledged and honored enough that they've had their day in court and we can release them, then our body is given the pathways to heal. Our bodies are designed to heal naturally. It's us that, with all of this unpacked baggage, that gets in the way. It's like, trying to go from here to LA with solid cars on the freeway. You just can't get there. But if you remove each car at a time, you can get there eventually with nobody blocking the path.
I love that. Thank you for sharing those stories, and thank you for being vulnerable to share your own story as well. Something that I want to encourage people is that healing is a lifelong journey.
Yes.
You're
Yeah.
learning about yourself is a lifelong journey. And the more that we dive deep into our emotions and removing those blockages, you don't need 10 years of therapy. We need to understand that we all have trauma and there's nothing to be ashamed of. For the
Right.
longest time, I felt like, oh, maybe I'm a little ashamed because I got married so young and then divorced so young. But there's nothing to be ashamed about that because it happens. I can't say I didn't try, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. It happened the way it did. And there's nothing to be ashamed of because our challenging times shape us to who we are. But in order to become who we're called to be, we need to remove those emotional blockages.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And I have to say too that I really believe that you and I are exactly where we're supposed to be at this moment.
Yeah,
You were supposed to go through that experience because it allowed you to have a really great learning experience. And now look at you sharing this podcast with so many people who could use it. And it was that experience was transformational in
yeah.
getting you to this point, right? It was supposed to happen. And just like everybody else, we are supposed to learn how to heal these things so that we can become who we're most meant to be.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer that we're all here on this earth and on this planet to serve one another
Yeah.
in one way or another. No matter what you do, see how you can add value to other people's lives. Because once you add value to other people's lives, then your work becomes fulfilling. Then your career becomes fulfilling. And I want to ask you, you did mention that you did create a tapping app. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. So I created the app because I saw that what was out there wasn't really touching the true power of tapping. Like I mentioned
Mm.
earlier, a lot of what's out there is really putting a band aid over people's issues. And I firmly believe 100% in my heart that we can eliminate the issues, not just manage them. We can eliminate them entirely if we go to the root cause. And so that's what the app was designed to do. It has almost 170 different tapping scripts. So there there are opportunities for you to put a band-aid on things and just to get through your day, but there are also lots of videos that tell you how to address the root cause of different issues like addiction or depression or anxiety, because a lot of people don't know how to approach those issues. They don't know where to start. They don't understand how to get to the root cause of something like that. So yeah, I was passionate about creating the opportunity for people to heal at the root cause, and that's what the app is designed to do.
That's incredible. Amy, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and I know this is going to help the right people, and I pray that it reaches the right people.
I
But
hope so
before we
too.
go ahead and wrap things up, what does it mean for you to be nourished inside out?
I used to think that in order for me to be healthy, I needed to get rid of all of the things that I didn't like about myself.
Mm,
And I think the understanding that I've come to over the years is that more than anything, being nourished inside and out means having compassion for all the parts of who I am. Doesn't mean getting rid of that part of me that has an ego and feels embarrassed if I don't do something exactly right. It means having compassion for that part of me. It means having compassion for the part of me that doesn't always want to work out, that doesn't always want to eat right. It just means accepting and honoring where I'm at in that moment as part of a whole that makes me me. And that to me is what nourishes me inside out.
I love how you said that. Instead of trying to get rid of the parts of you that you don't like, learn to fall in love with the parts of you, all of you. I love that. Can you please tell us where can people find you and where can they support you?
I'm on all the socials, Soar with Tapping, and you can go to my website, soarwithtapping.com/podcast dash special. And you can find a code there to input into the app. If you want to download the app, you can get 50% off your first annual subscription for your special gift for your listeners.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Amy. And I'll have everything linked down in the show notes below. So everybody go support Amy and start your healing journey because you have a bright future ahead of you. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.